1941, Second World War. Germany has most of Europe, and the Yugoslav prince signs a non-aggression pact with Germany. This causes people and generals to feel like Prince Paul had betrayed their state, and 2 days later they overthrow the government. This nullified Prince Paul's pact, and Hitler, angry, orders the army to destroy the Yugoslav army. This was called Operation Punishment. On April 6, German and Italians killed tens of thousands of civilians, and 2 weeks later, Yugoslavia was in ruins. This delayed Hitler's attack on the USSR by 6 weeks, and Germans and Italians continued to dismember Yugoslavia, allowing pro-Nazi Croatians to have their own independent state. They massacred 1/3 of Serbs in Croatia and exiled the remaining Serbs. To protect non-Croat Yugoslavs, the movement guerrilla fighters started. This was two groups, the Chetniks and the Partitions. The Partitions were the Communist Party, led by future dictator Josip Broz Tito, while the Chetniks were led by the officer of the ex-Royal Army. Both had support from the Allied forces. But Britain dropped the support on the Chetniks, and Yugoslavia became communist after the Second World War. On October 16, 1944, the USSR entered Belgrade and the Germans were defeated. Now, Yugoslavia is a communist nation with the leader Tito in full control. Tito was a large factor, an important factor, during the Second World War and the Cold War that caused Yugoslavia to thrive and continue existing. On October 16, 1944, as stated before, the USSR had entered Belgrade, defeating the Germans. This allowed Yugoslavia to become a communist nation with Tito in full control. To ease the ancient hatred and tension among ethnic groups, he created the Federation of 6 anomaly equal republics, each with its own elected president. These were Croatia, Montenegro, Serbia, Slovenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Macedonia. He also created a ruthless police force to crash any hint of independence coming from the republics. But there were threats, internally and externally, to his dictatorship. Internally, it was the Serbs' nationalism, while externally, it was Joseph Stalin, the man who had brought him to power, and saw him as competition. This was primarily because Tito had refused Stalin's demand for the USSR troops to be based in Yugoslavia. How did the USSR stop Tito? Well, the USSR had Yugoslavia banished from the World Communist Organization in June 1948. Soviet bloc countries were instructed to break trade with Yugoslavia, causing it to quickly be isolated from the communist world. Tito recovered with the aid of the US. They had a secret pact with Truman in early 1949. The secret pact was secret because Truman couldn't have the public know that he was supporting communism in any shape or form. Independent from the Soviet bloc, if Truman provided economic assistance for Yugoslavia, while Truman's logic was deny the Soviets from any other puppet state. He would send money, materials, and arms to Yugoslavia to defend from the Soviets. Stalin authorized and planned the assassination of Tito, but this mission was aborted because in 1953, Stalin died. From 1945 to 1989, Western powers saw Yugoslavia as a geographical and political buffer against the USSR. This ended when the West won the Cold War. No more Western foreign aid was flowing into Yugoslavia, causing its economy to collapse. They didn't reform in the right way like Hungary and Poland, and when Tito died in 1980, he left no single successor and a complicated system of rotating presidency among 8 members, 1 for each republic and 2 for Serbia's provinces, Kosovo and Rhodesia. The president always put the interests of ethnic groups that he belonged above national interest. This caused unrest about economic mismanagement, corruption, and the lack of genuine freedom. This thus creating strikes and general riots. Yugoslavia was, during the early years of the Cold War, a focal point in the attempt by the United States to break down the communist world. The Wedge Strategy was, according to John Lewis Gaddis, as a crucial and innovative aspect of foreign policies by Truman and Eisenhower, which relied on nationalism and the combination of U.S. pressure and support to create divisions between the Soviet Union and other communist states. meaning that the United States' foreign policy was centered on slowly finding weaknesses in the communist side, the Soviets, by inflicting feelings of nationalism not only in the United States but in other territories. The Wedge Strategy was implemented throughout the world, but its impact on Yugoslavia showed its great strengths and weaknesses. Yugoslavian nationalism was a key part of the United States policy in order to prevent the disruption posed by the Soviets, furnish the Yugoslavs with a means to defend themselves. Post-World War II, anti-Soviet strategies by President Truman did not translate to Eastern Europe because he believed that the areas in Western Europe were more vital. There were underlying hopes that countries in the Balkans and Eastern Europe would take a nationalistic role to prevent Soviet control. It was a surprise when Yugoslavia split from the Soviet Union in 1948. The United States saw this separation as an opportunity to promote their anti-Soviet ideals in Eastern Europe. As a matter of fact, they supported Tito's regime in order to inflict on the Kremlin. It is interesting to see the irony in the United States foreign policy when it comes to taking down the USSR. In a way, it is like they were trying to keep their enemies closer. Communism, in a sense, would annihilate itself. Communism wasn't what the Truman administration and many before him were worried about, but it was a new type of communism, a communism that wasn't really real. It was Leninism and Stalinism that had morphed the ideals of communism into their own. In 1951, the United States declares that there is no longer a persistent danger by the Soviet Union to Yugoslavia. Now, the U.S.'s foreign policy wanted to spread Tito's influence around the region or satellites and convince him to affiliate his nation with NATO. After failing to convince Tito's side with the West and use his influence over other countries, General Eisenhower ended the military support program for Yugoslavia. The Yugoslavian leader was continuously seeking to reconnect with the USSR and didn't want to be used to liberate the other satellites. Nonetheless, the program ended, and the administration continued to show support for Tito's government as an alternative to Soviet rule. The fact that Yugoslavia was a communist state and was not adhering to Soviet imperialism made them a key ally to the United States in order to follow and adhere with the Wedge Strategy. The Cold War was an ideological and geopolitical conflict. Both motivated their populations to fight on by predicting their eventual triumph of their belief system over that of their adversary. Both Eisenhower and Truman tried to jeopardize their relationship with Tito by attempting to alter his communist ideology. By the 1950s, Eisenhower had compromised with the mere fact that Tito had sided with the West and not its Soviet counterpart. During both the Truman and Eisenhower administration, policy towards Yugoslavia was centered not around ethnic components, but the central entity that Tito ruled. The separation. Yugoslavia included Macedonia, Croatia, Slovenia, Serbia, and two autonomous parts of Serbia, Kosovo and Vojvodina, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Montenegro. Orthodox Christianity, Catholicism, and Islam were the predominant religions in the area. And during the 1980s, militias were gaining power through nationalistic political agendas. By 1991, Croatia and Slovenia were withdrawing, blaming Serbia of controlling the government and finances of the state. In turn, Serbia accused them of separatism. Apart from the cultural and religious divisions among different ethnic groups within a nation, after Tito's death, the Constitution of 1974 allowed for the liberation of Serbia, internal factor, and the external factors such as the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, along with the unification of Germany, contributed to the collapse of the Yugoslav nation. The U.S. government was now focused in supporting Eastern states, which were trying to implement free market economies. The American government undermined the support that Yugoslavia needed in order to stay afloat. To add, they were no longer a threat binding the state together.
Croatia, 1991 through 1995. After the independence of Croatia in 1991, Croatian Serbs claimed one-third of the newly independent state and wished to unite with Yugoslavia. With the help of Serbs and the JNN, non-Serbs and Croats were expelled from the land through a series of ethnic cleanses. A UN-monitored ceasefire came into place in 1992. In the meantime, Croatia used its resources to strengthen its army and try to take control of the territory. In the summer of 1995, the Croatian military undertook two major offensives to regain all but a pocket of its territory. known as Eastern Slavonia.
The separation of Croatia and Slovenia. Slovenia separated in 1991. They declared independence on June 25th, which caused brief military intervention between Yugoslav forces and their own, commonly referred to as a 10 Days War. Slovenian forces win, and the GNA is forced to withdraw. Serbs and Croats wanted to take over the land and had already secretly met up to negotiate the split. In the referendum of 1992, Bosnia-Herzegovina gained its independence from Yugoslavia, but were boycotted from Bosnian Serbs. Soon after, with the support of the JNA and Serbian forces, Bosnian Serbs were declaring their own territory as Serbian. They soon took the control of 60% of the country through violent military campaigns against non-Serbs. Soon after, Croats in the area declared independence of their land with the support of Croatia. These two conflicts made a three-way war, which was estimated to kill 100,000 people and displace about 2 million. In November 1995, the Peace Treaty of Dayton gave an end to the war, but crimes were still committed. In the summer of 1995, in Srebrenica, led by Ratko Mladic, Bosnian Serbs went into the UN safe zone and killed about 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys, while the women and children were driven out. This is considered to be an act of genocide. Serbia and its allies. Slobodan Milosevic was the head of the Serbian Communist Party in 1986. He rose to power by listening to rioters while attending a meeting in Kosovo in May of 1987. The rioters stated their mistreatment within the Albanian majority. Back in Serbia, the event was covered with such a manner that it made him the leader of the Serbian nationalistic movement. He merged Kosovo and Vojvodina in 1989 and replaced the leaders of Montenegro with his supporters. Montenegro and Kosovo. Albanian communities in Serbia were seeking independence, and the Kosovo Liberation Army was an insurgency that fought against the Serbian population in 1998. Serbian forces used violent tactics against the Albanian civilians, forcing them to flee. NATO carried out a 78-day airstrike in Kosovo and Serbia. Therefore, Serb forces intensified their persecution of Kosovo and Albanian civilians. Milosevic withdrew Serbian forces in 1999. The conflict is still unresolved. Macedonia, separated from Yugoslavia in 1991 peacefully, later admitted to the United Nations under the name of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, the FYRM. At the time, it was a large population of Albanians, which in 2001, through the Albanian National Liberation Army, fought for the independence of the Albanian population in areas of the country. That same year, the conflict ended with a peace deal and constant monitoring of NATO in the area. The National Intelligence Estimate warning to the United States to the government in 1990 said that Yugoslavia will cease to function as a federal state within a year and will probably dissolve within 2. Economic reform will not stave off the breakup. A full-scale inter-republic war is unlikely, but serious intercommunal conflict will accompany the breakup and will continue afterward. The violence will be intractable and bitter. There is little that the United States and its European allies can do to preserve the Yugoslav unity. There lies an obvious prediction of these conditions that Yugoslavia would suffer in the coming years. According to Thomas Shreve, it was also fundamentally inconsistent with what the U.S. policymakers wanted to happen in the former Yugoslavia, and had almost no impact on U.S. policy. The unity of Yugoslavia was a top priority for the United States foreign policy after the end of World War II. This was due to their neutral role it played in the Eastern Front and its controversial position to the communist state. But was it worth it? The United States played a big role in Yugoslavia, so did the Soviet Union, but at the end of the day, their national interests impeded them from acting upon and preventing the split to happen, a split that caused thousands of lives to be lost, and violence to be still persistent today.